Hello, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2025 Absolute Good Author Showcase. And today I'm here with my guest, Dr. Michael T. Railey, author. Dr. Railey wrote Living with a Ghost, Who We Are and Why We Do What We Do. Let me tell you a little bit about him before we interview him. He is a native St. Louisan. He graduated from the St. Louis College of Pharmacy. He attended medical school at the University of Missouri-Columbia. Mizzou, go Mizzou, my alma mater. And he completed a family and community medicine residency at the University of Florida. He also served as the chief medical officer for the St. Louis County Health Department. And Dr. Railey held positions as the Associate Dean of Student and Multicultural Affairs at St. Louis University School of Medicine and currently works as a consultant and student advisor. And in 2025, January 2025, prior to President Biden leaving office, he received the Dr. Donald Brennan Humanitarian Award and the President's Call to Service Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Urban League at St. Louis University. Welcome, Dr. Railey. How are you?
I am good. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. My goodness. You know, I'm going to say what the title of the book is again, Living with a Ghost, right?
Right.
But the promise of the book, this is not a book about ghosts. It is a book about being haunted by destructive thoughts and how to stop them. And I'm just wondering what motivated you to write the book?
Well, I'm a family physician by trade and by training. And after 40 years of medicine working with children, mothers, fathers, families of all ethnicities and backgrounds, it became plain that everybody had problems. Some worse than others, but everybody had problems. And what I noticed is that many of the problems were connected to the past. They were connected to your childhood or connected to your family. Sometimes your family was your problem. It could have come from your genealogy, from your mom or dad. But nevertheless, I felt that people needed help with understanding how to interpret these things from the past so that they could cease to be haunted by those items.
Thank you so much. And, you know, working with you as your writing coach and then your publisher, I learned so much about life, my own life and others' lives. And I just want to acknowledge that you had a major change in your life before you wrote the book.
Yes.
Yes. So why don't you tell us about your health? What happened?
Well, I had a detached retina. And then shortly after the detached retina, I began to develop glaucoma. And along with the glaucoma, I became deaf. And then after the deafness, both knees replaced, then cardiac, then pacemaker.
I don't think I even knew all that.
So yeah, that's probably enough.
Well, one of the impactful quotes in the book, you said, the impact of our spiritual or religious belief system is not only vital to guiding us, but it can also be vital to our health. Having strong spiritual beliefs can protect us, even rescue us from unhealthy behaviors and inherited tendencies.
Yes.
And I thought that was quite unique as a medical doctor. You mean to tell me faith can affect our health?
Absolutely. I have to say that during particularly the cardiac open heart surgery, I honestly never really had any nervousness or fear that I was not going to recover. I really felt that because of my faith, there were things that I was going to do yet, and that this was just an obstacle that I had to get past.
Well, you know what I'm going to talk about next, my favorite part of the book, which is about ACEs. So can you tell us what the concept of ACE or ACEs is, what it stands for, and what it means to people?
Yeah. Well, very quickly, Kaiser Permanente on the West Coast, along with the CDC, did a study on 17,000 individuals. And what they discovered was that there were certain things that happened to you during your childhood that had a lasting effect. Things like sexual abuse, psychological abuse, social abuse, having someone who had been incarcerated in your household, drug abuse, watching your parents fight or being beaten by a mom or a dad. All of these things had a lasting effect. And when the number got up to 4, it actually changed your existence rate. In other words, if normally you would have lived to 74, if you had 4 ACEs, you could count on probably dropping your life expectancy by another 4 or 5 years.
Yes, and that's called adverse childhood experiences. Right. And even divorce mental health issues from your parents, also smoking. Those can all be things that add to your ACEs.
Absolutely.
And I think that is such a fascinating thing. When I learned about that a few years ago, I just said, well, why don't they teach us this? Because I think people would probably be better parents and people if they could say, you know what, this stuff happened in my past and let me roll through it, or let me not put these things, to my children, right?
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Some people believe that ACEs is probably the greatest public health risk that we have in America.
So why don't they talk about it in Western medicine?
I think because it has to do with mental illness, people once again run away from it.
Yes, yes. Can you share what you talk about addiction? Because this was, I was shocked, and you talked about how influential addiction is in prevalence in the world today.
Absolutely. One thing for certain is that addiction is very common in family practice, in any practice. Overeating, overeating due to emotional problems, shopping. Some people even use church like an addiction. Smoking, sex, pornography, all of these things and more are related, and we try to address that in that chapter on addiction, because there's an area of the brain called the dopaminergic center, in which when you do something that feels good and gives you relief, you get kind of a squirt of this substance called dopamine, and you want to do that again so that you can feel good again. But the problem is it develops into a habit, and then that habit develops into a pathway, and that pathway gets you destruction.
Gotcha. And when we were talking, you told me that pornography addiction is so prevalent, it's almost like sliced bread now.
Yeah. One person said you could add the revenues of ABC, NBC, CBS, and all of them would still be less than what's spent on pornography.
It's frightening.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what is a generational curse?
I think we use the term, or at least I use the term generational, once you begin to see it extend from grandmother, mother, and daughter. Probably the easiest example is grandmother had her first baby at 16, and then her daughter comes along and has a baby at 17 or 15. And then she has a child and has a baby again in the teen years. So what's happening is we call it a generational curse, not because it's related to a ghost or some sort of a haunting, but because it is a repetitive behavior that has to be dug out and discovered so that you don't pass that on generation after generation. And so that's probably the best way to look at a generational curse, a bad habit which has not been eradicated in one generation goes on to the next generation.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you so much. Can you share with us an example from your own life of feeling haunted or experience that you had, that you got through, and how did you get through it?
Well, I don't have direct proof because I never saw my dad drunk, but I know my dad did like alcohol. And I did not know my grandfather very well, so I had no proof there. But I did know that I began to drink as a teen, and I liked it. Now, I didn't get excessive because I already had made up my mind that I wasn't going to let anything habituate me that would stop me from being an MD. So when I caught myself beginning to perform in that way, I said, this has got to stop. So I cut back on it. And so now I look for that in my children, and I try to warn them that you may have a tendency to want to drink. You got to avoid it.
So one of the most wonderful things I noticed about your book, you said we inherit a lot of things. So if someone comes from a family of artists, oftentimes they're artistic. If someone comes from a family of doctors, they may become doctors, but they also inherit some of those other things that may not be so pleasant.
That's right. We like to forget about the bad things that we inherit and then embrace the good things. But the bad things are there. And one of the most important parts of the book, I believe, is the fact that recognition is critical. If we look in the mirror and we don't recognize what we see, then we ignore it, and the problem never gets resolved. So we have to be honest with ourselves and have the courage to say, this happened to my granddad, this happened to my mom, this happened to my dad. I'm not going to let it happen to me. What do I need to do?
Very good. Well, Dr. Railey, I want to thank you. It was an honor and a pleasure to work with you. I remember it wasn't too long ago. I was standing in a friend's house and someone said, "How's life going?" I said, "Oh, I'm working on a few books." No, I said, "Oh, everything's going good." She said, "Are you still working on books?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, okay." And then this lady said, "Hey, what do you do?" And I told her, I said, I do coaching and this thing. She said, "My husband needs you." I was like, "Okay." And then you called me. I think that was a Thursday. And on Monday, I got a call from you.
It was a good day.
It was a good day. Dr. Railey, I just want to thank you because one thing, it was a little difficult for you to talk about your own challenges. And I think, anybody, to say, "Hey, I've gone blind," and these different things. You wanted to do sailing. I think you wanted to sail, you wanted to fish, you wanted to do all these things.
Yeah.
And then look what happened. But you turned these experiences, these health challenges into something that leaves a legacy that people will be able to read from generation to generation and be able to help them solve their problems. So before we finish today, I just want to say, what is one thing you'd like to leave with our audience today? One thing they should know.
That it is worthwhile to pursue improving yourself. There is a self that God designed for each one of us that is our best self. But it's easy to fall away from that and just say, "This is where I am. I'm going to stay this way. This is me." That's not what God wants. God wants us to work on ourselves, improve ourselves, and get closer to Him.
Thank you for being a physician willing to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Dr. Michael T. Railey for being the guest on our